What do you think, feel, believe about change? What are some of the stories that you hold? What are some of the narratives that you've perhaps inherited from down your family line, maybe even ancestrally or in your family unit as you were growing up, or that you've learned from your caregivers as you were growing up? What are the things that drive your beliefs about change? Do you see change as being something to leap into, to be embraced, to be the solution to perhaps other issues that you may encounter? Or do you see change as being something to approach warily, perhaps even to be avoided, to be um, averted if it possibly can be? Or is it a mix of both? I know for myself, I often consider myself to be very pro change. Um, I happily embrace some changes. I've made decisions in my life, like working and living abroad for several years, different countries: Egypt, Portugal, Spain. I've made decisions about moving to different parts of the UK. And in fact, we're about to do that ourselves again. I'm quite comfortable with those ideas of change. And yet, I also know that in the past, I have avoided some changes. So I've avoided changes perhaps around how I think about myself, or I've avoided changes um, that have involved looking with a really clear eye at things that perhaps don't serve me, or mindset that perhaps doesn't serve me, or a belief that perhaps doesn't serve me, because that change just felt too daunting, too scary. It felt like if I make steps toward making a change there, then who will I be? What is my identity? And it's for these reasons that so many of us can have a really complex attitude and set of beliefs about change. And so there may be some things that you are, really ready to leap into, and other things that you just avoid. And my feeling is that often we don't explore what it is that we think, feel, and believe about change. And that by doing that exploration, we are then better able to understand the approach that is best going to work for us personally. And also, we're better able to understand what change really needs to happen. And we're better able to listen in and know, are we considering making a change because it's something we're running from rather than something we're running to? And that's something I've talked about before on the podcast. Or are we making a change because we have a sense that we should, whether there's some kind of social pressure, and there are so many social pressures that we face into about how we should look, how we should think, how we should behave, how we should feel about things. And so really understanding what is driving our desire to change, or what is driving our resistance to change, can be incredibly powerful. And I'm also really mindful, working in the space that I work in, which is essentially the wellness space and the well-being space, that when there can be some voices around us, even in such a nourishing, nurturing space like that, that can feel as though they're putting pressure onto us to be a certain way. If we're not meditating, then we're somehow failing. If we're not doing yoga every day, we're somehow, letting ourselves down. if we're not journaling, every day 3 or 4 pages and being eloquent and fluid and fluent, then we're somehow failing. And all of that, of course, is absolute nonsense, because the most important thing here is that we are able to see what it is that most serves us as an individual, see what are the constraints that we're recognizing, either we are putting around our own behavior or we have inherited, and that are, these sort of unconscious constraints that can be sitting there. And understanding it all from a very, very personal perspective, because each one of us is a uniquely beautiful, amazing, wonderful individual, of course. And so this whole topic was the basis for a series of retreats that I wrote and ran the first time a few years ago. And I've run them again sort of during COVID, during lockdown, and brought it all online. So initially it was all face to face, and the very first one we were in this incredible yurt lent to me by a wonderful woman who I met on another retreat that I had been a guest on, and she offered up this space by a river with horses grazing across the water. I mean, it was just too beautiful. And we came together as a group, this wonderful group of women, and began an exploration of change. And that led to a series of retreats, which became 5 retreats across that year. And as I had to move them when I wanted to run them again, I had to move them online. I ended up writing things down much more coherently than they had been, rather than this sort of flowy kind of experience that I was able to sort of lead when we were in person. I needed to bring things into a much kind of tighter sort of format, because obviously it's very difficult to be on a Zoom retreat for a whole day. So we had to make them much more concise and just come together for a few hours. And in the process of doing that, I gradually realized that actually I was writing a book, and the book became this, which is The Heart of Change. And I wanted to share with you some of the inspiration behind it, because it may help you also reflect on your own perspective on change. And the book is actually published this month as I'm talking to you. It's October 2021. And in fact, actually, this is a slight aside, but the process of getting the book published has been a beautiful experience personally, in the act of surrender. Because when you create something, and if you've ever created anything, I mean, drawn a picture and shown it to somebody, or written a story, or created a blog post or a social media post, the minute you create it, when you're creating it, it's yours. And the minute you share it, it comes into somebody else's hands. It's no longer is yours in quite the same way. And with My Darling Girl, as I wrote those initially, and I was sharing them on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, the wrench that I felt inside me with the sharing of each one was enormous. It was like I was birthing them. And I think, and then when we came to actually publishing the book, I felt like I'd already let go of each one. So actually publishing the book felt, it's okay. They no longer belong fully to me. They belong to others. So I can publish the book and it can go. But this time round, with The Heart of Change, my reflection Sorry. My reflection is that I didn't give enough credit to that feeling of how it is to create something and then to hand it over to somebody else, and how it is to detach myself from that creative process. And I think the universe has been doing its rather wonderful thing, because there's been a number of unforeseen delays in this publication process. I have a wonderful publisher who is an amazing man, and there have just been a series of unexplained or inexplicable or unexpected delays that have got us to this point. But my understanding is that it's absolutely, definitely going to be published this month. And actually, that time of delay has been really, really valuable for me, to detach myself from the book, so that I'm able to say, actually, it's ready now. It's ready. I'm ready for it to go out into the world. So if you're one of the people who pre-ordered a copy, I just want to say thank you so much for your patience. It's just been wonderful and so kind to be patiently waiting for the publication. And I hope that you find such value in the work that you do as you move your way through the book. So each chapter of the book, or each part of the book, is a reflection of the work that we did in each one of those 5 retreats. And each one of them was created to explore a different perspective of change, anchored in deep self-care and wrapped in self-awareness and self-compassion. And that, of course, is so fundamental. I think so often change is something that becomes this hard-edged thing, this thing that we sort of push up against. And actually, when we soften and when we breathe and when we cease to resist, but we surrender into it, it becomes not necessarily easier, but there is greater ease. If the distinction between those things is something that resonates there for you. And the inspiration for the material that I created for the retreats, and then of course for the book, it all comes from my own experience of making deep and lasting changes across all aspects of my own life. And I don't think there is any single aspect of my life which is unchanged over the past few years. And it also comes from my observations of coaching others and supporting them in their explorations of change. And you may already have heard, part of my own change story, but a few years ago, I found myself in a hospital isolation suite. I was dealing with a nasty bug that was trying to shut down my internal organs and resulting in sepsis and my 3rd bout of pneumonia that year. And what led to that period of ill health was a really familiar concoction of things that we will all be so familiar with: stress, grief, poor diet. I thought I ate well, but actually, when I came to really look at how I managed my nutrition, there was so much room for loving myself more. A lack of exercise, a lack of movement, and overwork. And then adding menopause to the mix meant that not only did I think my body was failing me, but I also thought I was losing my mental health too. And it took reaching that point of almost no return for me to wake up and see that something had to change. And that something was me. The distinction with this experience was that I no longer looked at external factors, trying to find something um, to change outside of me. I nearly did. I wanted to. I desperately wanted to leave my job. I wanted to move house. I wanted to lose weight. I wanted to look different. But getting so ill, um, and I think we see this story replayed time again, actually, and it's not something that I think anyone who's been through the process would ever recommend to anybody else. But it took coming to that, reaching what was my base point, what was my sort of bottom, if you see what I mean, in order for me to be able to recognize that actually, in order to rise up from there, I needed to do the inner work. I needed to work on myself inside and not just look at these external factors and try to change them in order to change my health or change how I was feeling. Um, and I'd spent my whole career working in change. I thought I understood what it entailed. I thought I knew how to help others, certainly. I thought I knew how to help others move through change in an organizational sense. But I realized I knew very little, actually, when it came down to it. Um, and I recognized that to make deep and lasting change across my life, I had to underpin everything I did with profound self-care. And I say I knew that. Of course, I didn't actually fully know that at the time, but I'm very grateful that some part of me, some tiny little part of me, was saying those words. And that part of me knew what I needed to do. And that at last I let her be in charge. And my experience is that change often feels less like a curve. You know, we often see sort of change as a curve model. And I see it more as this kind of looping squiggle where we can feel like we're moving back, forth, up, down, sideways in our efforts to maintain a forward momentum. You know, it is not a simple series of single steps. It is a whole flowing process that takes us in all sorts of directions in order to keep moving forward. But because of this, our biggest challenge can be staying present with the changes that we seek. It's very easy to lose our momentum. It's very easy to lose our way or to even forget what it was that we were trying to achieve in the first place. And another challenge can be simply identifying what it is that we actually want to change. So it's commonly recognized that there are phases to change, and they all broadly track the process from pre-contemplation, so before we've even thought about what we want to do, through to maintenance. So once we've got the changes in place, and then we just need to maintain them. And understanding where we sit in that process helps us see how we can move forward. And interestingly, actually, just a personal reflection here, I'm now in maintenance for so many of the changes that I've put in place. And I'm also recognizing that I need to go back through some of these practices because some of that maintenance is sort of shifting slightly or slipping slightly. So um, some of the nutritional sort of what's the word sort of philosophies that I've put into place. Um, yeah, there's a little. What I want to do is sort of go back and just explore some of those again and just see, okay, so what's going on where I sense that some of that is beginning to slip before things start to change in a way that doesn't benefit me. So that's really what the maintenance phase is about. It's about sort of coming back and going, okay, so what's going on here? How is that benefiting me? And what new steps, or what revised steps do I need to put into place to support myself? Um, and so just sort of going back a little bit, when I was creating the retreats that inspired the Heart of Change book, I reflected on the range of changes I'd put in place. And I realized how useful it is to begin with this understanding of what change means to us personally before embarking on making any decisions about how or even what we want to change. And I think this is quite unique. I think this is quite a different stance. This is about really taking our time to explore concepts and to look at things from a fresh perspective. And by doing that, we open up the opportunity to change at a deeper level rather than perhaps a surface level response that we can sometimes have. So often we put things into place in our life, and they're a bit of a sticking plaster. Rather than a deeper change. So an example might be what I was saying earlier about I wanted to leave my job. There's a part of me that really wanted to leave my job, and I did try. But my manager at the time did a brilliant piece of management and leadership, and persuaded me just to take a sabbatical instead. And that then enabled me to think more clearly. But what I was looking to do was just leave my job, and that would be a sticking plaster over the stress and unhappiness that I was feeling. Because what I actually needed to do was the much, much deeper work. And it turned out I went back there, I carried on working for another 18 months for the same organization. And by the time I left, I had a beautiful relationship with my work, in the sense that I was no longer blaming it for how I was feeling. I recognized that my feelings belonged to me, and it was my reaction to my work that was driving my stress response. And when I learned how to work with that feeling of stress and learn how to manage my own responses to things, my relationship with the whole job just utterly transformed. And in fact, I ended up being able to transform the work that I was doing as well, because I was coming at it from a completely different place. And so these sort of twin wings of self-awareness and self-compassion are absolutely vital to support us in how we make these deep shifts. And an example from my own life is that for decades, I'd considered myself to be overweight. And even when I was slight, I thought I was too big. I mean, when my husband and I met, I think I was, well, possibly like sort of 7.5 stone, something like that. I still thought I was too big. So there was definitely some body dysmorphia going on. And I had tried various routes of weight loss, from a brief phase of bulimia in my teens, to fasting or intermittent fasting, to slimming clubs. And none of them had a lasting impact other than to cement my feelings of inadequacy, because that's what was driving me. And when I recovered from that last bout of ill health, when I got out of hospital, I finally saw that amongst the many changes I needed to put in place, the key one was my mindset and my attitude toward myself. So what does that mean in practice? Well, for me, it meant stopping trying to be thinner. I wanted to be able to rely on my body. And in truth, I realized that I wanted to love the body I had been rejecting for all those years. And so I switched my mindset by choosing to feel stronger. And this seminal shift in my thinking led to me addressing my nutrition and my self-esteem, as well as exploring why I saw food as both an enemy and a friend. And I changed the way I ate, not just what I ate. I took expert advice and I listened to it, which is that was quite a big shift for me. I was very fond of taking advice and not listening. I learned to love food as a source of energy and health. And with that, I began to move more because I was starting to feel a bit more comfortable in my body. And alongside all of this, I really focused continuously on that deep sense of expanding my self-awareness with deep self-compassion across all aspects of my life. And fundamentally, I chose to care for myself. And I also chose not to judge or ridicule choices that I'd made in the past, but to accept them as being part of me. And therefore, I began to see them as worthy of my love, not as something to be embarrassed or ashamed about. So if I sort of looked back at, food choices that I'd made, so I was, at the time that I got ill, I was quite a bit heavier than I am now. And rather than look at food choices I was making, like, I don't know, buying a baguette at Liverpool Street Station before getting on the train home because I was exhausted, probably hadn't really had lunch, or just sort of grabbed something slightly rubbish for lunch as well. And then late at night, getting on the train, grabbing a baguette, and then that was almost like a form of reward at the end of the day. And rather than beat myself up about having made those choices, I began to see them as, just a part of me that was exhausted, that hadn't been fueled, and that really needed some attention and was reaching out to an external source, food, for that attention. And what I was then able to do was to start to give that part of myself my inner attention. And so she no longer needed to look elsewhere. I also took the decision to no longer run from what lay behind my stress, my fear, my grief, my self-worth, my limiting beliefs, and to turn towards those in that Buddhist sort of sense that, turning towards rather than turning away from the things that we don't, that make us feel uncomfortable. In the Buddhist sense, we turn toward them, and actually by doing that, it starts to take some of the power out of those things. So we're then even more able to step closer to them and face into whatever it is that they're trying to share with us. So from that place of turning toward, from understanding what change meant to me personally and where the initial changes most needed to happen, I was able to understand what it took to give me a sense of balance. And balance means feeling grounded. And when we're in a period of transition, it is invaluable to know which practices anchor us so we can keep bringing ourselves home. And this phrase of bringing ourselves home, I just think is so beautiful. For me, it's a little bit of a mantra. What will help bring myself home? And of course, woven into all change is the need for resilience. Not that stiff upper lip, ignoring what hurts kind of resilience, but the compassionate kind. And resilience enables us to adapt and to grow through change. And from there, we can develop our appreciation of how change can be a beautiful thing. So as we build those muscles of resilience, we can embrace disruption as something to be owned by us and perhaps even enjoyed. And it's a space where we can decide how we want to feel rather than being driven by old patterns of behavior. And lastly, there comes this experience of emergence. And it's a time when we can see and explore what it feels like to come through change, accepting that it may lead to other changes that ripple out from us. And this term emergence is used to describe baby bear cubs stepping out from their mother's den for the first time, nourished and curious. And it feels a beautiful analogy for how we can emerge from a time of change, curious and open to fresh changes yet to come. So these are the 5 elements that make up the book: change, balance, resilience, disruption, and emergence. They all sit at the heart of change. And they help create the bedrock of self-awareness and self-compassion that underpins how we make and manage changes across the whole of our life, whether that's at home or at work, in our health, our well-being, or our relationships, or simply and vitally and most importantly, in our deepest desire to know and love ourselves. So this book is an invitation. It is an invitation to simply see where the exercises within it take you. And that's fundamentally what it is. It's a series of explorations through exercises, through journaling prompts, through mindfulness practices, and to trust that you'll receive what you need from the process of exploring them. And the other thing that I really love about the book is that if you're seeing this on, the light's not very good for actually showing you the pages if you're seeing this on YouTube, but there, that you write in the book. So it's something that becomes like a journal of your experience of change. It's something that you can carry with you and return back to whenever you need to. So by beginning with an acceptance and awareness of ourselves, by bringing compassion and kindness to our attitude, by choosing to think, feel, and do what will truly serve us most at the deepest level, that's how we move forward with clarity and calm and confidence. So, thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate you being with me as I shared my my personal reflections on what created this book. And actually, as I say that, I'm reminded of how writing the content for each of those 5 original retreats felt like the deepest sense of flow. I would sit probably at the top of the garden. That was my favourite place to go and do kind of creative thinking and write and have these sort of big sheet of paper and coloured pens and these thoughts and lines going from one thought to another. And at the end of it, I just look and think, I have no idea where all of that came from. It just felt like flow. And in exactly the same way, putting this book together has also felt like flow. It's felt like it's the right thing. It's felt like these 5 components really sit together in the most beautiful way. And I would love to hear your reflections. If you do decide to buy a copy, that would be wonderful. And the place to go to is shookbop.com. So shookbop.com. And you can pre-order if you're listening as this podcast goes live, or order because it will be in stock. And as you're working through the material, if you've got any questions at all, then please message me either on Facebook or on Instagram, or you can always email me. I'm very accessible. And just ask. And also, I would love to hear the reflections of the change that it supports you with, because also fundamentally, you're complete and perfect exactly as you are. And so the choices that you make about anything that you do choose to change comes from that place. Okay, take care, my darlings. And I send you a hug and a wave.